Guilt arises from our desires, which can range from virtuous to malevolent and everything in between. It manifests when we regret actions or words we once yearned to express, leaving us wishing we could reverse time and avoid those choices. How we respond to guilt is also shaped by our desires. Some people may feel compelled to make amends, apologizing to a father they've cut off, reconnecting with someone they bullied in childhood, or seeking to atone through acts of kindness. The difficulty with guilt is that it often surfaces when the opportunity to rectify our mistakes seems lost, akin to trying to visit a childhood home that has long since been demolished. In some cases, guilt stems from irreversible actions such as murder or deeply traumatizing others. When making amends becomes impossible, self-punishment may ensue, either emotionally or physically. Some may yearn for karmic retribution, anxiously awaiting the day they believe they will face consequences. This internal struggle is central to our exploration of James Sunderland. When James's wife Mary was diagnosed with an unspecified chronic illness, his world shattered without warning. Suddenly, he was thrust into the role of caregiver for the love of his life. As Mary's condition worsened, James did everything he could to support her, but the immense weight of this burden seeped into every corner of his existence, slowly eroding him. People often overlook the toll caregiving takes on a person's life, how it strips away your identity, your lifestyle, and even your social connections, until your world is consumed by the role of caregiver. As Mary became sicker and more embittered by her looming death, she began to lash out at the one person who remained by her side, James. In her struggle, she could no longer bring him happiness. Even just the loss of physical intimacy can lead to deep feelings of isolation and resentment, affecting both partners. The caregiver is acutely aware of this shift, but so is the care recipient. Often, the person receiving care realizes they can no longer meet their partner's expectations, which can spiral into self-hatred and anger, an anger that tragically is often directed at the very person they wish to uplift.
Get the hell out of here. Leave me alone already. I'm no use to anyone. I'll be dead soon anyway.
When thrust into a situation so dark, isolating, and steeped in sorrow, every thread of your morality begins to unravel, a slow, constant leak that erodes you, moment by moment, second by second. You find yourself longing for things to be different, aching for the way life was before it all began, but most of all, you start to daydream about any possible escape from this reality. After 3 years of caring for his ailing wife, who had grown increasingly bitter and verbally abusive, James made the decision to end Mary's life. He convinced himself it was an act of mercy, a release from her suffering, but deep down, he knew he had no right to make that choice for another person. With quick haste, he pressed a pillow over Mary's face, unable to bear looking at what he was doing, unwilling to confront the guilt that would soon consume him. In that moment, James committed an irreversible act, one he could never undo, never apologize for, and one he would carry for the rest of his life. The instant he stepped back, his life became defined by guilt. Autodegradation is defined as the degradation of an organ or substance caused by itself, a concept that vividly illustrates James Sunderland's experience in Silent Hill 2. The brief moment he spent harming Mary led to a more profound self-destruction. His subconscious begins to leak into his reality, manifesting as feelings of guilt, sexual frustration, and repressed desires, reflecting his choice to avoid confronting Mary's face when he killed her. James yearns for punishment, and in doing so, he inflicts it upon himself through vivid, haunting thoughts that take shape as terrifying monsters. As he flees from the reality of his actions, he convinces himself that he is a harmless person searching for his wife, but the true battle is against himself. The trauma and guilt transforms his actions into a repressed memory, making his self-punishment even more brutal. While he fights these bizarre creatures born from his mind, he genuinely believes he is trying to find and save Mary. This is where our guilt leads us. James's guilt is the most insidious kind, one that offers no path for apology or amends, a lifelong scar that he will bear. He is locked in a struggle with his own guilt and his desperate need for punishment, guiding him into the darkest corners of his mind. Through the guidance of this guilt, we discover our true selves. It grants us the opportunity to change our future actions and evolve as individuals. While the sensation of guilt is unpleasant, it is arguably one of the most essential emotions we experience as humans. As we witness James unravel from the weight of his actions, his mind fracturing between reality and the subconscious, we come to understand that he is not a bad person, but rather a broken man who believes he deserves to be punished, to feel pain, to be hunted. If James were devoid of those feelings, the implication would be far more troubling. He might resemble a psychopath, or at the very least, someone delusional. Throughout our journey with James, it becomes evident that he is not inherently evil. He attempts to help Angela and Eddie, and is visibly shattered after having to kill Eddie in self-defense. He peers down at his hands hauntingly, as if it's the first time he's ever done something like this, as if he's shaken by it, destroyed by it, and even regrets it. These actions do not align with the traits of a serial murderer or psychopath. James values life and recognizes when he is deserving of punishment. This leads us to the conclusion that guilt guides James to understand that, although he committed a horrific act and must atone for it, he is not an evil person. He is simply someone brought to his knees at the altar of desperation. However, this isn't the complete puzzle just yet. There's a very important piece that we're missing, one that embodies every stray guilty thought James has, and for James, that being is Maria.
See, I'm real.
Maria is the embodiment of everything James yearned for, yet could never attain with Mary. A flirtatious, lively young woman who captivates him with her unwavering affection. Working as a pole dancer at Heaven's Night, she is a fantasy brought to life, alluring and attentive in all the ways Mary ceased to be. Maria lets James play the role of the hero, allowing him to feel needed and protective. Whether he's comforting her through sudden bouts of illness or rescuing her from threats, she gives him a purpose that Mary, in her decline, no longer could. And while James often acts reserved, perhaps even dismissive, Maria's presence stirs something he can't fully ignore. He can't help but rush to her side when she's in danger, showing that she has a hold on him that runs far deeper than he'll admit. Maria is far more than a companion. She is a manifestation of James's guilt, crafted from his deepest desires. She embodies the fantasy he projected onto Mary, someone who was always there for him without bitterness or suffering, who filled the role of a perfect partner without the weight of real, complicated love. Silent Hill conjures Maria as a mirror, not only to James's suppressed needs, but also to his deepest regrets. By showing James this dream, Maria forces him to confront how his ideals eroded his perception of Mary, distorting her memory into something she could never have lived up to. Through Maria, James is faced with the unsettling truth about unchecked desires. She becomes a lesson in the cost of wanting, how the pursuit of an ideal can harm others along the way. In chasing a comforting illusion, James realizes how blind he was to Mary's suffering. Maria is his desires turned against him, and James is forced to protect and comfort her. He's really nursing the wounds of his own guilt here. In the end, Maria isn't just a temptation, she is a reminder that every fantasy carries a price. As she reaches out to him, she forces him to acknowledge the depths of his guilt, his flawed love, and the reality of the harm he caused. Maria, in her kindness, is a profound lesson in how our own desires can be the cruelest thoughts we carry.
Mary, it's okay, James.
When James finally reaches the Lakeview Hotel, he has completed the path of auto-degradation, stared his guilt in the face, yet he still clings to denial, holding on to fragments of a life that no longer exists. It's only when he plays the tape, when he sees Mary's face, hears her voice, looks directly into her eyes, that reality strikes with brutal finality. In that moment, James can no longer hide. He is a murderer. The raw shock in his face gives us a glimpse into his fractured soul, guilt, disbelief, his collapsing world. Everything he's tried to ignore crashes down, ripping his mind apart. Here, James moves beyond mere auto-degradation, a shift made clear as the monsters around no longer attack him. He's crossed into the next cycle of guilt. Acceptance. It's a term that often implies peace, but for James, acceptance is the darkest stretch of his journey. Accepting past sins, accepting his fate, means facing the ultimate truth that the path back has vanished. He realizes that the island of his past, his before, is already drifting away, irretrievable. Helpless, his head falls lower, facing only a future overshadowed by this irredeemable sin, with no way to make it right. In this stage of guilt, self-punishment gives way to a drowning sensation. No longer clinging to illusions, James is forced to confront a series of bleak paths, each equally realistic and irreversibly cut off from his past. He can choose to end his journey in life, try to absolve his actions by adopting Laura and moving on, or he can cling to a fragile delusion that there's still a path back by choosing to be with Maria. But every path acknowledges the same truth. That island is lost forever. His sin is unatonable. Guilt at its end offers no redemption. It guides us through suffering to a conclusion of this chapter of life, leaving only the lessons it taught along the way. When we face unrelenting guilt, it steers us through darkness toward a final reckoning. We can either let it drown us or use it to discover who we are. The only hope lies in becoming a better person, forged by the knowledge of who we've been.
It's all over now. I don't need you anymore.
Once a person like James has finished all prior stages, they enter a final stage that transcends everything that has come before. A complete and utter surrender. The internal battle has reached its conclusion, and there is no further conflict awaiting him regarding the person he has hurt. She is gone, and in this case, it is James's fault. The most constructive path forward is to surrender to reality, absorb the lessons learned, and walk a new path. This surrender does not equate to absolution. Societal punishment may still loom, regardless of how much time passes. However, in this moment, his journey through guilt is at an end. There is nothing more to be guided toward. I don't believe that even the gravest of mistakes entirely define a person as bad. Still, they undoubtedly take away a piece of your soul that you can never reclaim. There is no singular answer to how one can repay their debt, whether to themselves or others. The solution depends on the context. If I were to voice my opinion, I would argue that the best ending in Silent Hill 2 is the leave ending. Although James has taken a life and can never be forgiven for that, choosing to end his own life perpetuates a cycle of pain, causing more people to lose one another. James must choose to live on, aware that he may face societal repercussions such as imprisonment or worse. Yet his decision to persevere can grant Laura a future she otherwise may not have had. If James dedicates himself to caring for Laura and invests in her well-being, he may not absolve himself of his sin, but he can positively impact another life, just as profoundly as his poor choices impacted Mary. I truly believe that Silent Hill 2 is not just a lesson revolving around guilt, but also a lesson about coming to peace with yourself.